In October 2021, CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced he was changing Facebook's name to Meta and expanding its borders into the metaverse.
What is the metaverse?
Metaverse.
In the metaverse.
The metaverse will be the successor to the mobile internet.
The company promises a new reality, full of avatars and futuristic worlds.
Today, we're going to talk about the metaverse. I want to share what we imagine is possible.
It comes as other billionaires are venturing into new realms. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have poured billions into space projects.
I want to thank every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer, because you guys paid for all of this.
But as these businessmen expand their territories, there are growing concerns about how their technologies are impacting the world.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
On January 6th, the group of Trump supporters violently stormed the US Capitol building.
I was at risk of being stripped of and killed with my own firearm as I heard chants of kill him with his own gun.
Documents leaked by whistleblower Frances Haugen shone a new light on how Facebook did little to stop the attack.
Like they basically said, oh good, we made it through the election. There wasn't riots. We can get rid of civic integrity now. Fast forward a couple months, we got the insurrection.
And revealed how the company knew it was spreading hate and misinformation on a global scale. From stoking ethnic violence in Ethiopia to fueling a genocide in Myanmar.
The more we're invisible, the more harm is done. And we've seen this in Myanmar, and we've seen it in India, and we're living it in Ethiopia now.
So why does Facebook, now Meta, continue to put profit ahead of the safety of its users?
This research is not a bombshell. It's not causal research. It's in fact just
Well, I beg to differ
research
with
that
you,
we
Ms.
use for
Davis.
product teams.
This research is a bombshell.
And as the world follows Mark Zuckerberg into the metaverse, can we trust it? Facebook's rebranding may be a cynical attempt to shift focus from its numerous failures.
It sounds like we made a mistake there. I apologize for that. In retrospect, it was a mistake. We have made a lot of mistakes in running the company. It was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
But the metaverse, at least on the surface, promises a new era.
Today, we're seen as a social media company. But in our DNA, we are a company that builds technology to connect people. And the metaverse is the next frontier.
So this was an inevitable sort of next step in the evolution of social media, allowing the virtual physical presence of the people that you're connected to from around the world to you.
Boy.
Oh, hey, Mark. Hey, what's going on?
Hi, Mark. What's up, Mark?
Whoa, we're floating in space? Who made this place? It's awesome.
What Mark Zuckerberg is doing is he's trying to advance his pocketbook. Zuckerberg was the future once. Now it's VR, and he's trying to get into it.
More data makes good business sense.
Facebook has a very clear business model that's driven by the need to gather as much data about their consumers or users as possible.
But there are fears that the new data we create in the metaverse could lead to a privacy nightmare.
Facebook has made a big deal about the fact that it's not going to be doing facial recognition on photos that you upload to Facebook anymore. But it hasn't said it's not going to do facial recognitions in the metaverse. And so the point is they're building an AI-driven engine that will be manipulating even more effectively behavior in the metaverse than it's been able to manipulate in real space.
And although generating more data is not necessarily harmful, it could give companies like Facebook an unprecedented amount of control.
Mark Zuckerberg holds as much or more power over the connection and communications that people have than anyone ever has before.
So long as that business model doesn't change, Meta is a much more terrifying version of what Facebook is in the real world right now.
Just weeks before Facebook's rebranding, former employee Frances Haugen released thousands of internal documents. The papers show the potential harm of its products, harm that could be amplified in the metaverse.
I believe Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy.
The leak suggests Facebook knew how damaging its products could be and ignored employees who had concerns.
it is proven that every time they denied these things before, they were not just unfair in their denials and attacks on independent researchers, but they knew that those people were right. And that takes it from, just being defensive to being deceptive.
According to Facebook's own research reported by the Wall Street Journal, their platforms make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teenage girls.
None of it came as a massive surprise. Instagram harms kids. I remember telling a 13-year-old about it. And she was like, yeah, everyone knows that.
Facebook may be having its big tobacco moment. In the 90s, CEOs of big tobacco firms stood up in Congress and attempted to play down the dangers of cigarettes.
Yes or no? Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
Imagine a world in which cigarettes gave people cancer, but only the tobacco companies knew that, and only the tobacco companies had any chance of finding out. In that world, I think it would be extremely important for someone within the companies to come forward and tell the world what they know.
These companies have played a very, very clever game in trying to protect their reputations despite the amount of harm they produce. And that's why now Facebook and Google spend more than Philip Morris and Exxon on lobbying in the US.
These deceptions can have dangerous consequences. In January, Trump supporters stormed the US Capitol building. The leak suggests Facebook failed to take steps to mitigate the spread of misinformation and polarizing content on its platform.
Extremists used many platforms, but Facebook is a recurring theme.
For years, this platform was allowing itself to be used to sow distrust in elections and to build more and more anger in these communities.
Some safeguards put in place for the 2020 election were rolled back in the lead up to the attack.
They had a whole series of circuit breakers, as they would call them, to kind of slow down the craziness that was obviously developing. But late into the afternoon of January 6th, they hadn't even pulled the trigger on more than half of them.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
Look, nobody should think that they caused January 6th, but certainly if it weren't for Facebook, it would have been harder to develop the extraordinary organization and capacity that January 6th revealed.
Weeks after Frances Haugen's revelations, Facebook and its other products, Instagram and WhatsApp, were hit by a major power outage.
It was so bad that the only way Facebook could let the world know what was going on, and this is true, was by posting a message on Twitter.
The outage showed how much the world relies on Facebook, for better and for worse. For over a year, Ethiopia has been locked in a brutal civil war.
In August, 28 bodies, some with hands tied and bullet holes, washed up on the shores of a river on the Sudanese border. Witnesses believe they came from Tigray. The Ethiopian government called the discovery a fake propaganda campaign.
We don't know how many have died because we don't have a real body count so far, but it's one of the bloodiest wars we've seen so far.
Facebook knew it was being used to incite ethnic violence in the country, but did little.
We've seen state and non-state actors using the platform to spread misinformation and disinformation to an extent where you'd have content that's, calling for ethnic extermination of certain ethnic groups. We know that, different militia groups were organizing using the platform to raise money for arms, getting many other things that would be against many international laws.
A deadly conflict fueled by Facebook, and not for the first time. The company is also accused of playing a role in the brutal crackdown of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar in 2017.
What the papers demonstrate is that the government in Myanmar used the Facebook platform to exacerbate ethnic division, which led to genocide in Myanmar.
They're not to blame for the existence of folks, who are pursuing a genocidal campaign, but they did deliberately become the engine.
This is a global problem. In Vietnam, Facebook bowed to pressure from the government to censor content. And in India, Facebook's platforms have been inundated with a torrent of anti-Muslim hate speech. Part of the problem is the lack of investment Facebook places outside the US.
90% of Facebook's audience is outside the United States. But 90% of Facebook's safety budget is inside the United States.
So they are literally incapable of any moderation at all in many, many countries around the world. And what that means is that hate and misinformation are flowing even more rapidly in other countries.
For activists, the reported lack of consideration given to other countries came as little surprise.
And we all have to sort of live with the consequences of a system that makes us completely invisible. And the more we're invisible, the more harm is done. And we've seen this in Myanmar, and we're living it in Ethiopia now.
The cost of them fixing their platforms is actually that they have to hire people. The cost of them doing nothing is zero. And so they've calculated, of course, it's so much cheaper to let the world burn.
In the US, politicians are growing angry.
Mark Zuckerberg ought to be looking at himself in the mirror today. And yet, rather than taking responsibility and showing leadership, Mr. Zuckerberg is going sailing.
But have so far been unable to rein in the once untouchable company.
Mark Zuckerberg has proven that he is not the one to be trusted with dominating the next level, which will now be the metaverse, when he hasn't even addressed any of these issues.
Facebook might be the winner of the next generation too, and that would be a disaster, because the truth is they've administered this generation appallingly badly.
For many, it begs broader questions.
Our current debates about tech platforms like Meta, like Facebook, are debates about what kind of culture, what kind of society we want to live in. In an increasingly globalized world, that's a more and more challenging question to answer.